It started like any other business trip. My name's Ethan and I work in corporate logistics. Glamorous, I know. Travel's a big part of my job, and over the years, I've gotten used to the sterile routine of airports, hotels, and conference rooms. My wife, Claire, had always been supportive, or so I thought. We've been married for 8 years. Claire is the kind of woman who lights up a room, a real social butterfly, always the life of the party. I loved her for it. She was the sparkle in my otherwise methodical life. But maybe I loved her too much. Maybe I overlooked the warning signs. The trip I just returned from was supposed to be a 3-day ordeal. Meetings, schmoozing clients, the usual grind. But on the second day, my boss called, telling me the client had canceled the last session. I was thrilled. I hadn't had a free weekend in months. The first thing I did was text Claire, "Trip cut short, home tomorrow morning, can't wait to see you." Her response was almost immediate, "That's great, babe, miss you, drive safe." Everything seemed normal, but as I would soon learn, normal is often just a mask. The next morning, I hit the road early, eager to surprise her. I pictured the look on her face when I walked through the door. Maybe I'd stopped to grab her favorite pastries from the cafe down the street. It was the little things that made her happy. I pulled into the driveway around 10 a.m. Claire's car was there, as expected. But another car was parked nearby, a sleek black sedan I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it might belong to one of her friends. Claire often hosted book club meetings or impromptu brunches. But then something gnawed at me. There were no sounds of chatter, no music, none of the usual signs of Claire entertaining guests. The house was too quiet. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, careful not to make too much noise. My suitcase wheels clattered softly against the hardwood floor as I set it down. "Claire," I called out. No answer. I moved through the living room, noting the faint smell of cologne in the air, a scent I didn't recognize. My chest tightened as I climbed the stairs. That's when I heard it. A muffled laugh. A man's voice. I froze at the top of the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was her brother or a friend I didn't know about. But deep down, I already knew. I crept down the hallway toward our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a sliver of movement inside. My breathing slowed, every step calculated as I pulled my phone from my pocket. When I pushed the door open just enough to see, my suspicions were confirmed. Claire was lying in our bed, tangled in the sheets with a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, muscular, and young, probably 5 or 6 years younger than me. They were laughing, sharing an intimate moment that should have been mine. My stomach churned, but I didn't burst in, screaming like I wanted to. Instead, I pressed record on my phone, the camera capturing every damning second. I focused on their faces, the room, the sheets that Claire and I had picked out together. They didn't notice me, too wrapped up in their little moment of betrayal. I backed out of the hallway, my head spinning. My world was crumbling, but I couldn't afford to lose control. Not yet. I needed to think clearly, to plan. I slipped back outside and sat in my car, replaying the footage. My hands trembled with rage, but there was a strange satisfaction in knowing I now held the evidence. Claire wouldn't be able to worm her way out of this one. I could have confronted her right then and there, but what would that accomplish? A shouting match? Tears? Half-baked excuses? No. I wanted something bigger. I started making calls. First, I called my lawyer, explaining the situation and forwarding the footage. She was calm, clinical, and methodical. A perfect counterbalance to the storm raging inside me. "This is solid," she said. "We'll make sure you come out of this clean." Next, I called my friend Chris, who worked as a private investigator. I wanted to know who this guy was, what his story was, and how long this had been going on. Chris didn't ask questions, he just got to work. Finally, I called my office, letting them know I'd be taking the rest of the week off. "Personal reasons," I said. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not only had Claire betrayed me, but she'd done it in our home, in our bed. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a deliberate, calculated act of disrespect. That night, I checked into a hotel, giving Claire no reason to suspect I'd been home. I needed time to put the pieces together to plan my next move. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a thought crossed my mind. If she could be so cold, so callous, why should I hold back? I wasn't just going to end this marriage. I was going to end it in a way Claire would never forget. I didn't sleep much that night. The hotel bed was comfortable enough, but my mind was spinning. The image of Claire laughing in bed with that guy replayed in my head like a broken record. Every laugh, every touch, every smile, they all felt like daggers. But anger wasn't enough. I needed clarity. This wasn't just about ending the marriage. It was about taking control of the situation and ensuring Claire couldn't manipulate the narrative. By morning, I had a plan. The first call I made was to Chris, the private investigator I'd hired. "Did you find anything?" I asked as I sipped the lukewarm coffee from the hotel lobby. "Oh, I found plenty," Chris said, his tone laced with grim satisfaction. "The guy's name is Kevin. He's a personal trainer at that fancy gym downtown. And get this, Claire's been a member there for the past 6 months. 6 months. I repeated, gripping the coffee cup tighter. Yep, and it gets better. She's been booking private sessions with him twice a week. Looks like those sessions were more involved than your typical workout. My stomach churned. 6 months. That meant this affair had been going on for at least half a year, maybe longer. All that time, she'd been lying to my face, pretending everything was fine. Chris wasn't done. There's more. I checked her social media accounts. She's been careful not to post anything incriminating, but she's tagged him in a few gym-related posts. Nothing obvious, but if you look closely, the connection's there. Send me everything, I said, my voice cold. Will do, Chris replied. My next stop was the bank. I'd always been smart about money, keeping our finances separate even after we got married. Claire had her own account, funded mostly by the part-time work she did as a freelance graphic designer, but I covered most of the big expenses. The mortgage, utilities, car payments. Now, I wanted to ensure she couldn't touch anything of mine. I met with the bank manager, explaining that I needed to lock down my accounts and ensure no one else could access them. Just taking precautions, I said, keeping my tone casual. By the time I left, every joint account was frozen, and my personal accounts were secure. Claire wouldn't see a dime more from me. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer, Dana, to discuss the next steps. I handed her the additional information Chris had dug up, including screenshots of Claire's social media posts and a detailed timeline of her gym sessions with Kevin. This is solid, Dana said, flipping through the paperwork. With this kind of evidence, we can argue for adultery as grounds for divorce. That'll give you a strong position when it comes to dividing assets. What about the house? I asked. Dana smiled. If the court sides with you, it's likely you'll keep it. Claire doesn't have the financial means to buy you out, and given her behavior, a judge would be inclined to favor you. Good, I said, my jaw tightening. She's not staying in that house. Not after what she's done. Dana nodded. One more thing, if you want to control the narrative, it's important to stay calm and composed. Let her make the mistakes. Trust me. Someone like her will try to twist things when you confront her. I'll keep that in mind, I said. That evening, I returned to the house for the first time since discovering Claire's affair. My heart was pounding as I pulled into the driveway, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't about emotion. It was about execution. When I walked through the door, Claire greeted me with her usual smile. Hey, babe, you're back, she said, coming over to kiss me. I dodged the kiss, pretending to be preoccupied with my suitcase. Yeah, trip got extended, but I'm home now, I said flatly. If she noticed my cold tone, she didn't show it. Instead, she launched into a story about her busy week, describing all the errands she'd run and the projects she'd worked on. It was almost comical watching her lie so effortlessly. I let her talk, playing the role of the tired husband who wasn't paying attention. But inside, I was cataloging every word, every glance, every subtle sign of guilt. That night, as she slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I'd come home to give her enough rope to hang herself, and she didn't disappoint. The next day, I began setting the stage for the final confrontation. I copied all the evidence, photos, videos, financial records onto a USB drive. I also created a folder labeled for friends and family, containing everything they'd need to understand the truth. Claire had always cared about appearances, priding herself on being the perfect wife and social butterfly. Exposing her affair to our circle would be the ultimate blow. But first, I wanted her to admit it. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, I casually brought up the gym. "You've been going a lot lately, huh?" I said, keeping my tone light. Claire froze for a fraction of a second before smiling. "Yeah, it's been great. Helps me stay in shape." "Must be nice," I said, taking a sip of wine. "Maybe I should join you sometime." Her smile faltered. "Oh, you'd hate it. Too many people. Besides, it's kind of my thing, you know?" I nodded, hiding my smirk. She was starting to squirm. Good. The trap was set, and I was ready to spring it. After my not-so-subtle dinner conversation about the gym, Claire became noticeably more cautious. She stopped mentioning her workouts altogether. But I wasn't about to let her off the hook. The house felt like a stage, and she was fumbling through her lines, trying to play the role of the innocent wife. What she didn't know was that her audience, the clueless husband, had already seen behind the curtain. The next day, I reached out to Chris, my private investigator friend, to confirm the timeline. "She's definitely still seeing him," Chris said. "I followed her to the gym this morning. She didn't even go inside. She met Kevin in the parking lot, and they drove off together. Spent 2 hours at his apartment before heading home." "Perfect," I replied. "Keep documenting everything. I want this airtight." I knew I needed more than just circumstantial evidence. I wanted Claire to admit to everything, and I wanted it on record. The more she squirmed, the better my position in the divorce would be. That evening, I decided to push her further. We were sitting on the couch, the TV playing some mindless reality show, when I casually asked, "So, when's your next gym session?" Claire didn't even look at me. "Oh, I'm not sure. Maybe tomorrow." "Why?" "I was thinking I'd tag along," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I've been meaning to get back into shape." Her reaction was immediate. She laughed, too loudly, and shook her head. "You? At the gym? Come on, Ethan, you'd hate it." "Maybe," I said, shrugging, "but I could use the motivation. You seem to enjoy it so much." Claire shifted uncomfortably, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's just my thing, you know? My time to decompress. You'd probably feel out of place." "Maybe," I replied, smiling faintly, "but it'd be nice to see what you're so passionate about." She didn't respond, and the tension in the room was palpable. I let it hang there for a moment before changing the subject, giving her the illusion that I'd dropped it. The next morning, I left for work as usual, but parked my car a few blocks away and waited. Sure enough, around 10 a.m., Claire emerged from the house dressed in her gym gear. She got into her car and drove off, and I followed at a safe distance. She didn't go to the gym. Instead, she drove straight to Kevin's apartment, just like Chris had said. I parked down the street and watched as she knocked on his door, greeted him with a kiss, and disappeared inside. It was almost surreal, watching her so brazenly betray me. I snapped a few more photos from my phone, just to add to the pile of evidence, and then drove back home. That evening, I decided it was time to escalate. We were having dinner again, this time, her favorite takeout from the Thai place down the street. Claire seemed relaxed, probably convinced she'd dodged any suspicion. I had an interesting conversation with Dana today, I said, casually mentioning my lawyer's name. Claire looked up, her fork hovering midair. Dana, why were you talking to her? Oh, just getting some advice, I said, taking a bite of my food. You know, about protecting assets. Her face paled slightly. Protecting assets? From what? I set down my fork and met her gaze. From situations like infidelity, I said calmly. The color drained from her face completely. What are you talking about, Ethan? I leaned back in my chair, my eyes never leaving hers. I know, Claire, about Kevin. About the 6 months you've spent sneaking around with him while I've been working to support us. She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. That's not true. I don't know what you're talking about. Really, I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. Because this says otherwise. I played the video I'd recorded of her and Kevin in bed. The sound muted, but the image is crystal clear. Her eyes widened in horror as she watched herself on the screen, her lies unraveling before her. Ethan, I can explain, she stammered, tears forming in her eyes. Oh, I'm sure you can. I said, my voice cold. But I'm not interested in your excuses, Claire. I've heard enough lies for a lifetime. She reached across the table, grabbing my hand. Please, Ethan, don't do this. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I yanked my hand away, standing up. Didn't mean anything? You brought him into our bed. Claire, you lied to me for months. You think I'm just going to shrug this off? She broke down, sobbing, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness. Just a cold, burning resolve. This marriage is over, I said firmly. And trust me, by the time I'm done, you'll regret every choice you made. Her sobs grew louder, but I turned and walked out of the room. I had what I needed. The rest was just a matter of execution. Claire's sobs echoed through the house as I closed the door to my office, leaving her to wallow in the mess she had made. I sat down at my desk, my mind racing but my emotions unnervingly steady. This was no time for anger. Anger could wait. What I needed now was strategy. I opened my laptop, reviewing the files I had meticulously organized over the past few days. There it all was, the video of her with Kevin, photos of their encounters, screenshots of her social media activity linking them together. Every piece of evidence was clear, undeniable, and ready to be used. My lawyer, Dana, had advised me to tread carefully. Let her think she has the upper hand, she'd said. Don't show all your cards at once. And most importantly, keep your composure. The more erratic she gets, the stronger your position becomes. And that was exactly what I intended to do. The next morning, Claire approached me with puffy eyes and a trembling voice. She had clearly spent the night crying, but I wasn't moved. Ethan, please. She began, her tone pleading. We need to talk about this. What's there to talk about? I interrupted, my voice calm but cold. You cheated. You lied. There's nothing left to say. Her lip quivered, but she pressed on. It was a mistake, a stupid mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. Don't insult me, Claire, I said, standing up and crossing my arms. You had 6 months to think clearly. And every single time you chose him, she stared at me, her tears spilling over. I'll do anything, Ethan. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Please don't throw this away. I almost laughed at the irony of her words. Don't throw this away? She tossed our marriage into the trash the moment she invited Kevin into our bed. I'll think about it, I said, my tone deliberately noncommittal. Her expression shifted, relief flickering across her face. She probably thought she still had a chance, that I was softening. I wasn't. Over the next few days, I let her stew in uncertainty. I kept things civil but distant, giving her just enough hope to keep her guessing. Meanwhile, I finalized the details with Dana. We'll file for divorce on grounds of adultery, Dana said during our latest meeting. With the evidence you've provided, she won't have much leverage. No spousal support, no claim to your assets. And if she tries to push back, we'll use the video to shut her down. Good, I replied, nodding. What about the house? You're the primary earner and it's in your name, Dana explained. Given her behavior, a judge is unlikely to award her the property. It'll stay with you. That was all I needed to hear. The next part of my plan involved our social circle. Claire had always been the center of attention among our friends, playing the role of the perfect wife and hostess. I wanted to shatter that illusion. I invited a few close friends over for a casual dinner party, something Claire wouldn't think twice about. She was eager to help, throwing herself into the preparations like nothing was wrong. When the night arrived, she was all smiles, chatting and laughing with our guests as if she weren't harboring a massive secret. After dinner, I stood up, raising my glass. I'd like to make a toast, I said, my voice steady but tinged with an edge, to honesty, to loyalty, and to the people who value those things in their relationships. Claire's smile faltered, her eyes darting toward me nervously. But not everyone does, I continued, my tone sharpening. Some people think they can lie, cheat, and betray the ones who love them, and they'll get away with it. The room fell silent. All eyes were on me and Claire. What are you doing, Ethan? She whispered, her face pale. I'm telling the truth, I said. Pulling out my phone. Something you seem to have forgotten how to do. I played the video. The muted footage of her and Kevin in bed filled the room, the images damning and undeniable. Gasps erupted from our friends, and Claire's face crumpled in horror. Ethan, please? She began, but I held up a hand to stop her. This isn't for discussion, I said coldly. It's for clarity. So everyone here knows exactly who you are. Claire bolted from the room, sobbing, while our friends sat in stunned silence. The fallout was immediate. Word spread quickly, and Claire's reputation crumbled. Friends who had once adored her now avoided her calls, unwilling to associate with someone so publicly exposed. As for me, I filed for divorce the next morning. When Claire was served the papers, she barely had the strength to argue. You're really doing this, she said, her voice hollow. Of course I am, I replied. Actions have consequences, Claire. Maybe it's time you learn that. In the weeks that followed, I focused on moving forward. The divorce was swift and clean, thanks to the evidence I'd gathered. Claire left the house with nothing but her clothes and her shattered reputation. Kevin, predictably, disappeared from her life once the truth came out. I heard through the grapevine that his gym let him go after a few clients complained about his inappropriate behavior. As for me, I kept the house and my dignity. Sitting in my now empty home, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for what I'd lost, but also relief for what I'd gained. Freedom. And as I stared out the window, watching the sunset, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't rage or destruction. It's walking away with your head held high, knowing you've won. The day Claire moved out was oddly quiet. No shouting, no tears, just the hollow sound of her packing up her things, one box at a time. I stayed in the kitchen, sipping my coffee and staring out the window, pretending I wasn't counting the minutes until she was gone. Her car was packed by mid-afternoon. She lingered in the doorway, looking at me like she wanted to say something. Ethan? She began, her voice weak. I didn't even turn around. What? Do you think you'll ever forgive me? She asked, her tone desperate. I let her question hang in the air for a moment before finally meeting her gaze. No, Claire, I said calmly. I don't think I will, and honestly, I'm okay with that. She flinched at my words, then nodded slowly. Without another word, she walked out the door and out of my life. The divorce proceedings went exactly as Dana predicted. Claire tried to negotiate for a share of the house, but with the evidence of her infidelity, she didn't stand a chance. The judge ruled in my favor, awarding me full ownership of the property and ensuring Claire walked away with nothing but her personal belongings. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a moral one. As the dust settled, I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. I spent time fixing up the house, getting rid of anything that reminded me of Claire. The bed, the curtains, the photos on the walls, all gone. I redecorated the place to reflect who I was, not the version of me that Claire had tried to shape. Felt cathartic, like I was reclaiming not just my home but my identity. Claire's reputation, meanwhile, took a nosedive. The fallout from the dinner party spread like wildfire. Friends who had once adored her now wanted nothing to do with her. Even her family distanced themselves, embarrassed by her actions. As for Kevin, his gym gig was over and last I heard, he'd left town entirely. Whatever fantasy he and Claire had built crumbled as soon as reality set in. One day, about 3 months after Claire moved out, I got a text from her out of the blue. "Claire, hey Ethan, can we talk? I want to clear the air." I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to respond. Eventually, I typed a reply. There's nothing left to say. Take care of yourself. And that was it. Life after Claire wasn't easy, but it was free. I started focusing on the things I'd neglected during our marriage, old hobbies, new friendships, even a bit of travel. The pain of her betrayal didn't vanish overnight. But each day, it felt a little less sharp. One evening, as I sat on the back porch with a beer in hand, I thought about everything that had happened. The affair, the evidence, the confrontation. All of it seemed like a bad dream now. But there was one thing I'd learned through it all. Betrayal doesn't define you. It hurts, it scars, but it doesn't have to own you. I'd come out of this stronger, wiser, and more determined to protect my peace. Claire may have tried to tear me down, but in the end, all she did was remind me of my own resilience. And now, here I am, Reddit, sharing my story with you in the hopes that someone out there will see that there's life after betrayal. It's not about getting even. It's about getting better.